Welcome back to Civilnet. I'm delighted to be joined today by the Country Director of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Don Lambert. Thanks for joining us, Don.
Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be back with you.
So you guys have quite a few achievements under your belt this past year. Can you walk us through some of the ones you're most proud of?
I'll give you three. So first of all, we completed an 8.6 kilometer bypass section called the Agara bypass. Now, we do a lot of road building. What's significant about 8.6 kilometers? It's not a large stretch, especially the highway. But what was so unique about this section is we actually started it quite some years ago. And in doing so, we came across an archaeological find. So we stopped construction. We evaluated what was there from an archaeological perspective. And we redesigned the road project around the archaeological site. And for me, this is really a symbol, I think, of ADB and Armenia's partnership at its best. You know, this is an important road. It's looking forward to the economic future of the country, but at the same time, it's acknowledging and preserving the best of Armenia's past. So that's one that comes to mind.
What did you find? Can you tell me?
It goes back a couple thousand years.
Wow.
And it's settlements from Armenia's pre-writing past. And Armenia really is blessed, and you see this when you go to the National Museum, that it has been able to uncover a lot of its prehistoric history, which is just such a foundation, I think, for the Armenian people. It roots one. Another one I would highlight is school construction. So we've been long involved in helping provide modern schools for Armenia. We inaugurated 2 more last year. We inaugurated another one last Saturday, and actually, as we speak right now, the Prime Minister is inaugurating a 4th. So between these 4 schools, that's providing classrooms, modern classrooms, for a competitive global landscape for 4,000 Armenian students. And that is just absolutely critical, the investment in the human capital, as we've discussed before. And I'll give you one more. Last December, we subscribed as a foundation investor to a bond issued by Team Telecom, and this was a sustainability-linked bond. Let me explain what that is. So it's a capital market instrument that is more common to some extent in developed countries, but even there, it's a nascent capital market instrument. And what a sustainability-linked bond does is the issuer company commits itself to certain environmental targets. Carbon reduction, but not necessarily only carbon reduction. And then the bond investors are served by an independent verifier who goes and checks to see that company is really hitting those targets. And if they don't hit those targets, the interest that the company has to pay on the bond goes up. And ADB is proud to bring this instrument to Armenia because it is a great example of aligning private sector interests with global environmental interests. And the more you can get those incentives aligned, the more progress we're going to make.
You guys are known as the green bank, the eco bank. Tell us, what are some of the environmental projects that you're working on here? And also, maybe start with, what are some of the environmental, I don't want to use shortcomings, but what are some of the critical areas that we really need to explore here before we have COP, for example, you know?
ADB is Asia's climate bank. And as we look at Armenia, let me highlight a couple areas where ADB wants to be the leader, development partner with Armenia. I'll start with transport. ADB has made its mark, I think, in Armenia in transport. You know, we talked about this new bypass, but just more broadly, we've been very involved with the North-South corridor, with road projects here in Yerevan and other road projects around the country. And as ADB thinks about climate change here in Armenia, the transport sector is a natural starting point. And we are working with the government. ADB is working with the government on a couple initiatives. First of all, let's start with electric vehicles. You and I were chatting beforehand, and you remarked how 10% of the vehicle stock is already an electric vehicle. I think that's the starting point. Armenia is unique in its capacity to adopt electric vehicles. First of all, it's not a big country. You could get from the border of Georgia down to Megri, 1, maybe even 2 charges. So the size gives itself a natural advantage. 2, the electricity base is unusually clean here in Armenia. There's a little bit of natural gas, but for the most part, it's hydro, it's nuclear, which are not carbon emitting. And so the potential, if you're using a coal-powered factory to charge your electric vehicle, you might not be helping the environment very much. Yeah. But that's not the case here in Armenia. And the potential is in the coming years that the energy base could even become cleaner given the 2.5 gigawatt potential for renewable energy. So electric vehicles is one, and we've got discussions going on with the municipality of Yerevan about how that could be expanded. Second, traffic, I think as we all know, is getting worse in Yerevan.
It's abysmal already.
And if you look at the metro system, it has untapped potential. It's a Soviet-era system that has not been rehabilitated. ADB is in discussions with Yerevan municipality about rehabilitating that. So it's a more efficient, better functioning metro system that attracts a larger ridership. Additionally, ADB is in discussions with Yerevan municipality about adding another metro station.
Yapınyan, that one?
Sumerlu.
Oh, interesting.
Which has been a fast-growing area. Because the more convenient the metro system is to riders, the more people are going to use it.
Yeah, of course.
Moving beyond transport, you know, and you asked about areas where priority is needed, I'll flag water. Climate change patterns are becoming more evident, more obvious. It's not something that's happening in the future, as we saw with some of the flooding this year. It's happening now. And so ensuring that Armenia has the reservoir and irrigation systems in place to accommodate more sporadic and lower precipitation levels is absolutely critical. Otherwise, the broad diversified economic growth, which includes agricultural production, is going to come under increasing stress. So water is another priority. And then biodiversity. What a gift that Armenia has been awarded COP17 in 2026. This is the biodiversity COP, not the climate change COP that is better known, but this is the COP that is focused on nature-based solutions and preserving the natural ecology. And you asked for areas where Armenia could improve. I think this is a real opportunity. Right? Because it's kind of the cusps. You don't see industrialized agriculture here in Armenia at this point, but it's probably not long before it's coming, right? So learn from the mistakes that other countries have made and move to an agricultural base that is an agricultural production that is nature-based. And there are scars, a lot of them left from the Soviet legacy on the Armenian territory. And we see that up in Lake Sevan, where we're in discussions with the government about a water sanitation project to improve the quality of the water that is in Lake Sevan and ensure it's properly filtered, because that's an important economic asset for the country on a lot of levels, not just agriculture. Tourism, not least of all. And with the municipality, because as Yerevan aspires to become a world-class city, well, what do world-class cities have? They have green spaces. And Yerevan has made investments in recent years, and so you do see some green spaces, but they're really limited to the central downtown business area. You see them less and less as you move away from the center. Yeah. And you've got the municipality's lake, which again has enormous economic but touristic potential, and really to become the new lungs of an expanding city.
Isn't the main concept, Don, to take I think the city has already reappropriated the land around it to make kind of like a green walkway and bring the water levels back up. Is that the project that you guys are involved with?
Correct.
Amazing.
So we're the way our projects work is the government has to ask us to get involved, and generally the process begins where we work with the partner agency, in this case the municipality, on developing the investment rationale for the project. So that's where we're at right now, and so we need to go through that investment approval process, and then eventually, if the government would like us to work with them on it, we'd be happy to do so.
I'm going to ask the question that is most on the mind of all of our viewers is, other than just symbolic will, do you see actual follow-through by the government? Do they understand the gravity of the ecological situation in Armenia, or are they just paying lip service to this kind of thing? That's what we're all kind of concerned with.
So I think there's two things to point to. COPs don't come easily. And the government, and my understanding, particularly the president, fought very hard to get the COP. Now, when you sign up for a COP, you may not have been an ecological warrior beforehand, but as the eyes of the world shift to your country in the coming years, people don't want to embarrass themselves. And so if they weren't converted beforehand, they're going to become so in the next 2 years because they will want to represent Armenia well. Now, that's kind of a general answer. Yeah. On one issue in particular, though, I find actually the Armenian government quite forward-thinking, and that's the water that I mentioned.
That's good news.
ADB works across a lot of countries. When we talk about climate change, we break it down into two buckets, typically. Mitigation, which is reducing the amount of carbon that goes in the air, and adaptation. And adaptation recognizes that climate change is a reality and that we need to make investments to mitigate its impacts. Most countries are open to discussing mitigation because they need to build more power anyway, and they see the opportunity to tap into grants if they want to build green power. Countries are generally less open to talking about adaptation. Adaptation is like buying insurance. And when the insurance salesman calls, it's not really the conversation you want to have. So I do find, particularly on the topic of water and adaptation, Armenia is ahead of a lot of its peers in upper middle income countries where it does take the issue quite seriously.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because it is a very serious issue. We are landlocked. We know that the big three lakes in the region, right, are Lake Van, Lake Sevan, and Lake Urmia, and Urmia is gone. It doesn't exist anymore, which is just crazy to think about. Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to explore Armenia's investment environment. There are indicators that there's going to be a bit of an economic downturn in 2025. Not downturn in the sense that we're going to a recession, but our GDP our growth is going to be 5%, which compared to the double digits that we had the last 2-3 years, it's a little bit of a downgrade. And a little bit more on the negative side, Armenia is lagging behind similar sized countries when it comes to foreign direct investment. And what I'm trying to understand is why that's the case, right? Albania, Georgia, they're in the same category as us, but they seem to be attracting much more investment. Is it a regulatory issue? Is it a government intransigence issue? Is it a risk issue? Or is it something else entirely? Tell us a little bit about the investment environment here.
Foreign direct investment is going to be a challenge in a country like Armenia. I'll just be honest with you. And there's only so much government policy can do. That's because if you're a foreign direct investor, you want to be able to scale. Right? So let's say you make an investment in Georgia. Well, okay, I'm betting on the fact, well, first of all, Georgia's a sizably larger population, and Georgia's got good trading ties to Russia, to Armenia, and across the Black Sea into the EU. So if my idea does well, I have opportunities to scale. Now look at Armenia. 2 of your borders are closed. Your open border with Iran comes with a lot of constraints.
Yeah, it's a pariah state as well, unfortunately.
And even Georgia now is a complex political situation. And you've got a domestic population of 3 million people. And so the foreign direct investor looks at Armenia and says, well, if I do really well there, how do I grow that business? And that's why foreign direct investment in areas like IT have done so well, because they're not constrained by this landlocked status, right? If your idea hits in IT, okay, we bring it to the UK, we bring it to Silicon Valley. It's much easier to scale. That's also why an area like tourism has done reasonably well on foreign direct investment. If I were looking to other areas where you might be able to do this, agriculture is one that comes to mind, because there is potential to expand Armenia's agricultural output, and especially its exportable output of high quality products. But it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge.
We're starting to see more interest, particularly from the Gulf countries. Something like 2 flights per week would be enough to meet the entirety of the UAE's fresh produce needs, for example. And I remember I drove up to Dilijan 2 years ago, and in the hotel, like the cabin right next to us, you had 6 Emiratis, and they said they bought a cherry farm, a walnut farm. So they're establishing plantations to then send back. So you're already starting to see that. But we do have that famous case of the Masdar solar plant that I don't want to say collapsed. It's in limbo. So in the area of renewables as well, there seem to be some kind of hindrances to foreign investment here. Are you guys noticing that, is this something that the government is willing and open to work on?
The government is certainly open to it. You don't see the nationalist protectionism here that you do in some other countries. I think that for me, the more interesting question is, where can ADB play a facilitative role in that? Right? And so as I look at the sectors where we're engaged, I look at something like that sustainability-linked bond, because that wasn't subscribed to by only Armenian investors. Yes, it was largely pension funds and local banks, but some of that money is also coming from additional sources. So I think as a development bank, where I'd like to work with the government in terms of bringing in the foreign investment would be bringing more capital market instruments that are attractive to foreigners, helping build corporate governance systems so that Armenian firms have clean financial bills of health and can attract foreign investment.
Finally, Don, you guys must have some big plans for 2025. Can you walk us through a little bit?
Some of my priorities. Number one, during 2024, along with one of our development partners, we provided a lot of policy dialogue and advice to the government on housing finance for the more than 100,000 ethnic Armenians that arrived in 2023. Getting them into suitable and reasonable housing is something that someone like me and my colleagues at ADB, this is why we work in development, to help people in need. And so we look forward in 2025 as ADB working with the government on a housing finance project to get those people along their way and start the process of moving them into decent and permanent affordable housing. Second, our board approved, ADB's board approved a new road project going from part of the North-South Expressway corridor, going from Sishan down to a place called Bargusha Tunnel. And we look forward, ADB looks forward to working with the government and starting that project and the procurement for that. Because coming back to the foreign direct investment, well, how do you overcome some of these limitations? One is having good infrastructure in place, and there is no more important infrastructure project than the North-South corridor. And we're very excited about the Crossroads of Peace initiative, and that North-South corridor is a backbone for that.
Isn't the, once it's completed, if we have decent infrastructure that goes from north to south, or vice versa, wasn't it something like 72 hours of time saved from transporting goods from Asia all the way to Europe? Or did I get the numbers wrong?
I would have to come back to it. There's different ways to model the numbers, and it depends on what routes are taken. We have done some research that shows that if the Crossroads of Peace is implemented as the government envisions, then the most efficient route to come from the old Silk Road is to cut through Gyumri. And I think countries know that, to include Georgia, which potentially loses to some of the fact that the monopoly it has on that trade right now. And again, that's why ADB has been very enthusiastic for supporting the Crossroads of Peace and dialoguing with the government. But not just because of its economic benefits. But I think the lesson we learned from Europe after World War I is that if you want warring parties to stop fighting, you make the economic costs of a war inconceivable. And I think that's the potential of the Crossroads of Peace.
I agree with you on that note. Don Lambert, ADB Bank, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks again for watching Civilnet.